You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
I wanted to pivot to another issue here, and this is one not connected to any news of the day, not connected to politics, but as well, I shouldn't say not connected to politics, not directly connected to politics and political news, but I think it underlies a lot of the problems we see in our political system. One of the biggest trends of the last 20 years, I'd say, has been the proliferation of cancel culture. We have this great political divide where people on the left and right no longer wish to talk to each other. We have a fair bit of nastiness about that, not just in the House of Commons when politicians are lobbing their rhetorical grenades across the aisle at each other, but in civil society. We have people that are getting torn apart in their family dinners because they are unable to discuss things in a civil manner. But what is civility? This is a topic that I've heard a lot of people call for civility, but I've never heard that underlying discussion from a philosophical and spiritual and cultural perspective of what it is and why it's so important until I read a book that came out in the fall called The Soul of Civility, written by Alexandra Hudson, who I am very pleased to have joining me right now. Alexandra, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on.
Andrew, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
So why, I kind of gave a political lead into this. This is not a political book, but I certainly think it's applicable to the political climate in a lot of ways. Why did you decide to delve into civility first and foremost?
I came to my interest in this topic, honestly. My mother is called the manners lady. So I was raised in this home that was very attentive to social norms and social expectations. I am constitutionally allergic to authority, Andrew. That might not surprise you. I hate rules. I hate being told what to do. And so I remember always questioning these rules and expectations my mother always, asked my brothers and I to comply with. Why do we do things the way we do them? And is the way that we're asked to do them, is that the best way? Is it just because some self-appointed authority at some point in history said we should do it? And I just hungered for a why behind our norms and expectations. But my mother said that they would lead to success in work, school, life, and if I followed them, and she was generally right. Until I found myself in federal government. I actually served in the Prime Minister's office in Canada and in Washington, D.C., in a presidential administration there as well. And I saw and experienced this kind of a challenge to this conventional wisdom my mother had raised me with. In both environments, I saw these two extremes. On one hand, I saw people who were hostile. They had sharp elbows. There were no secrets about, that they were willing to dispense with anyone, step on anyone to get ahead. On the other hand, I saw people who at first I thought they were my people. They were polished and poised and polite, yet ruthless and cruel. And this second contingent really threw me because at first, they disarmed me. I thought they were my friends. But one thing my mother had said to me growing up was that manners mattered because they were an outward expression of our inward character. And yet here I was surrounded by people who are well-mannered but ruthless and cruel. So part of the argument is that there's this essential distinction between civility and politeness, that civility is more than just manners. Because as I learned, you could smile and be polished and well-poised, but not be respectful of others. So part of the argument of the book is disambiguating, disentangling these ideas, arguing we need actually less politeness, less the faux respect, the tone policing, the worrying about saying and doing the right thing, and more actual respect, more the disposition of actually respecting others. That sometimes requires telling a hard truth, offending people, engaging in robust debate.
Yeah, and I found that politeness, civility contrast to be a fascinating one because we see it. I'm glad you used the word tone policing because we see how civility or appeals to civility are used as a tool to quell dissent, to quell challenging certain ideas, behaviors, whatnot. And I think young women are probably particularly susceptible to this, young women and girls, where you're told to be civil, but the issue is not actually one of civility.
No, you're exactly right. So I was raised in Canada. I grew up in Canada and I am a strong woman and I'm from a family of strong women. And that often rubbed people the wrong way. Canada prides itself on being this polite society. I mean, I have friends that, wear Canadian pins when they travel abroad because Canadians are beloved. We're so nice, but there is such thing as too much of a good thing, that actually being nice is not all it's cracked up to be. Like there were times where I was told told, like people didn't, male figures in my life didn't know what to do with me because I spoke my mind, and that, like, I didn't fit their mold, their norm of what and how a woman
Mm.
Canadian woman should behave. And actually, so it's possible to value, tone. And as you mentioned, that these norms can be a tool of silencing, of repressing. And that actually, if we want a society of openness, of tolerance, of pluralism, it's actually essential that we make these norms of propriety matter less, in order to have open, honest discussion, and to have an open society.
How universal is this idea in your research of civility? And how much does this change from a North American context to a European context to, say, an Asian context?
It's a great question. So, what I found in my research, and I did approach this question from a global perspective, a universal
Hmm.
perspective, um, and what I discovered is that the norms of politeness, the manners, the etiquette, the technique, the external stuff of manners and etiquette, they tend to be very changeable across history and across culture, and even within a culture, between classes. Often manners have been used, and they are still used, as a way to define in-group, out-group. Keep the nouveau riche, the outsider, outside. It's a way to distinguish who, we're okay as long as we're doing and saying the right things. And this is actually an all too human tendency, that we see across history and across culture. Whereas the timeless principles of civility, restraint of the ego so that the social can flourish, that we can become fully human in friendship and relationship with others, those norms are remarkably timeless. And in fact, I opened my book with the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest story in the world, in my chapter 1, and then moved to the oldest book in the world, which is a manners book, a civility handbook from ancient Egypt, given to us 2400 BC. And so I really try to do justice to this subject matter. My book is about the most important question of our day. How do we flourish across difference, even when we deeply disagree? But as I learned, even though it's the most important question now, it's also the defining question of democracy, of the classical liberal project, also the defining question of our species. We've been trying to do this thing called life together across difference as long as we've been around. And I bring to bear the wisdom of the human tradition to help us do life better together now.
Just thinking of Asia for a moment, I think it's Japan where I learned of this. I've never been, but a friend of mine, his wife is from Japan, and he's been there many times. And he had said that there was a culture there where it's considered rude to not have the answer if someone asks. So if you say ask for directions in some context and someone doesn't know, they'll give you the wrong directions because they think that's the polite thing. But that's not actually helping you in any way. They're just pointing you down some random street. So you are right about how manners and civility, I mean, in that's an extreme example of you're being done a disservice in the
Right.
interest of being polite and respectful. And I think that's one of the areas where I would say is the core distinction, and that manners is how you behave. Civility requires a respect of other people that
Mhm.
manners doesn't. I mean, being well mannered in any context is just something you do. So, can you have civility without respect? And how do you get to the point where there is respect, which also seems to be in short supply, certainly in politics, but I'd say in society in general?
It's a great question about the relationship between civility and politeness. Can you have one without the other? And I think at its ideal, the disposition of civility, the inner orientation that honestly respects others, the dignity and irreducible value of others, out of that disposition will flow kind actions, polite actions that are actually other oriented, but they are an outgrowth of that earnest respect and esteem for the other. But the problem is when, as a society, we value just the external, just what we do and say, and we insufficiently seek to cultivate that inner disposition of really respecting others, really respecting the gift of being human. That's a problem. It sets us up for hypocrisy. It sets us up for disingenuousness. And so, as a society in the West, as Canadians, it's essential that we care less about the norms that make us seem good, and instead shift our focus to what actually makes us good and what is actually truly respectful of others.
One of the things, if we were to take a more forward-looking view on this, that a lot of people will struggle with is the how do we get there? Because
Mhm.
civil people engaging in a civil discussion like you and I are, and I hope our audiences can say, oh yeah, this is great, this is a good thing, but that doesn't deal with the shortage of it. So, I mean, you talked about your experience in politics and government, where you have people that are very ruthless, maybe they're ambitious, maybe they're sociopaths, whatever it is, but clearly they don't have or tap into in themselves what it is that they need to be more civil. So how do we as a society deal with this without just pointing the fingers and saying, well, I'm not the problem, he is or she is?
No, it is the most human and natural thing in the world to want to blame. Our public leaders, the other side. And my book is all about the power that we each have to be a part of the solution. That we can't blame media, we can't blame, who's prime minister, who's president, what's going on around the world. That all we can control is ourselves. And we vastly underestimate the power we each have to be part of the solution. So I call myself a refugee from federal government. So when I was in Washington, D.C., I fled. I came home from work one day and said to my husband, I am done with government. I'm done with DC, done with politics. Let's move to Indiana. And my husband's from the Midwest, from Indiana originally. So he was thrilled to hear this. He said, okay, sounds good. Let's do it. No take backs. And that was almost 6 years ago. We've been in Indiana since then. And one of my first friends here, her name was Joanna Taft. And she came up to me after church one day and said, hi, I'm Joanna. Would you like to porch with us sometime? And I never heard
I didn't know that was a verb, by the way.
That's right. I didn't either. I'd never heard that before, but we were curious, didn't know many people. We went to her home one afternoon, and I realized that she was staging this quiet revolution against our atomized and divided status quo from her front porch. That she had curated people across class, race, ethnicity, politics, just to inhabit a shared space, not to, have a curated conversation across difference, but to build trust and friendship that is so lacking today in our public life, and is in fact one reason why we're not able to have conversations across difference well at all, if we don't have that basic respect, trust, affection for our fellow citizens, our fellow human beings. And I actually had the privilege of studying and researching and visiting people like Joanna across North America who are doing the exact same thing. They're saying, I can't control what's happening in my nation's capital or around the world, but I can control myself. And I'm going to double down and make my community better, my family stronger. And there's tremendous power in that. I met people who were doing that with and without a porch, from their local coffee shop, from their, hosting supper clubs, dinner parties, from using a front stoop or front lawn. That it's not about, big city, small town. It's just about a way of engaging others in the world with civility, with hospitality, which is a high and noble expression of civility, and wanting to transform the outsider to the insider, the stranger into the friend. And this is something that is too important and too sophisticated and complex to be left to our public leaders to be, and it can't be scaled either. It's only something that can be individual, micro, at the one-on-one level. And it's a decision we have to make every moment of every day. Are we going to make the world a better and brighter place for future generations to live in? I mean, that's why I wrote this book, for my children. Or are we going to be part of the problem in how we live our lives? And I hope that readers come away encouraged that we have far more power to be part of the solution of restoring the soul of civility in our world today than we realize.
Well, and you even got the title in there. We'll put the cover up to augment that in people's minds. It is called The Soul of Civility by Alexandra Hudson. People can catch it on Amazon or elsewhere. And you've actually had quite a bit of critical acclaim for this now that's been out a few months, which is quite good. So congratulations on that, Alexandra. Thank you so much for coming on.
Such a pleasure, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.